Hello and welcome again to History with Richard. We're back again. It's been a marathon day, but this is what happens when you love a topic too much. Today, we're going to talk about who the first human being was, most likely first human being to circumnavigate the globe. And it's not going to be a big debate about, maritime stuff and ships. I'm not really across that. It's just going to be, in usual fashion for me, a convoluted story. And we're going to start with Muhammad in Saudi Arabia. So remember, Muhammad has his revelation from God, supposedly, in the 600s AD in the town, or the city today, massive city of Mecca. Islam then spreads, right? If you remember to our first video, spreads very fast across the globe. We have Islam North Africa, the Iberian Peninsula, remember? And it goes, so that's the western section, east. It flows very quickly into the Persianate world of Iran, the Iranian world where they speak Persian, and into our favorite place, the mysterious Central Asian steppe. It also comes quickly into India. By, I think, the 10th century, in the Common Era, there are sultanates, Islamic sultanates in India. And perhaps the most curious of all, Islam never makes it to China. There's a big battle between, I don't know exactly how this is possible, but somehow in the 700s already, there is an Islamic army. Maybe, I don't know if they're originally Arab from Arabia or where these people are from. An Arab army that meets the army of the Tang dynasty. Remember from last video when I talked about the Empress Wu Zetian? The Tang dynasty, who start in the 600s AD, sort of the same time as Muhammad, they clash with the followers of Muhammad in a big battle here somewhere in the 700s, and that sort of sets the boundary between the Chinese worlds and the Islamic worlds. Interestingly today, if you go to Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, these people are not, for the most part, Muslim. Same with China. However, you go to Indonesia today, and most Muslims in the world today are from Indonesia. And I'll have to do another episode about this. I'm not entirely sure how the Islamic faith was in India. There are actually some natural borders here between India, Bangladesh, Burma, down into Thailand and so forth. So it's a bit hard to go over land, and there's obviously the Himalayas and Tibet right there as well. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure why it was a sea route to get the Islamic faith to the Indonesian archipelago. It also never really took root in the Philippines. It was just starting to when the Spanish arrived. But yeah, that would be a fascinating story. But the end of the matter is, there are Islamic sultanates in the Straits of Malacca here, which is where our friendly neighbor here in Australia, Singapore, is now. Still a massive shipping strait, okay? Essentially one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, because it's the main connection point from the Pacific or the South China Sea. Every ship needs to go through there because it's super perilous to go anywhere south through the Indonesian archipelago. They go through this strait, and then they're in the Indian Ocean. So a big bottleneck. And the faith controlling this strait, because of the spread of Islam, is Islam. And that is the case. So when's the start of Islam? 600s AD. By the time of Ferdinand Magellan, or as we should say in Portuguese, Fernão Magalhães, something like that. I might have bungled it a little bit. This Portuguese guy that we all know about, Magellan, the first captain to circumnavigate the globe. By his time, there is an Islamic sultan sitting here in Malacca. not exactly in modern day Singapore, it's in modern day Malaysia. There is still a place there called Malacca. And the whole world, essentially the whole world, not Australia and the Americas, but Eurasia, parts of East Africa and Europe, Iran, the Persian-speaking world, the Arabic-speaking world that's mostly converted to Islam now. All this massive part of the world are obsessed with the spices, and especially 3 spices in particular: cloves, nutmeg, and mace. Mace and nutmeg are actually from the same plant. I was lucky enough right after school to be able to go to the island of Zanzibar. See if I can find it here, just here. And that became a big spice producing island as well, especially nutmeg and cardamom and stuff like that. But that was way later. That was in the 1800s, I think. We're talking about late 1400s, early 1500s here. And it's something that never gets mentioned, probably because people don't have nice, world globes like this. But the entire of let's focus on Western Europe again. The Western Europe nobility, or the Western European nobility, that includes the English, the Scandinavians, the Venetians, the Genoans, the Spanish, the Portuguese. Remember, at this time, this is sort of round about the time when the modern boundaries of Spain are starting to be formed. There's still a lot of small little kingdoms everywhere. But all of these people, regardless, are obsessed with those 3 things. They are status symbols. They are put in cooking. I don't actually know how the market is so big, but once the supply gets cut off, that's when you really find out what people want. And it does get cut off, something happens, people have to pay more for these things, and there is uproar. And those 3 spices that I mentioned, nutmeg, mace, and cloves, originate from some islands here. So this is where the naming gets really confusing, and it took me a long time to understand. Malacca, the Strait of Malacca, is the one in Singapore. Then there is something called the Malacca Passage. So Malacca with an A, Malacca with an O, but they essentially sound the exact same thing. And people will talk about the Malaccas, the Malacca Islands. I think they're the same thing as the islands here in the Banda Sea, or the Banda Islands. They're very random, just volcanic, I think a lot of them, islands now belonging to Indonesia. And they're in this very interesting part of the world. For those of you who are nerds about evolution and stuff like that, the Wallace line goes, I think, through these islands. And they are the only place that these spices are found. So for a Western European noble to get this, it has to be at the time of, say, when Ferdinand Magellan, Fernão Magalhães, when he's born, I can't remember the exact date, late 1400s, for his noble, the local king, King Manuel I, I think is the king when he's sort of doing his seafaring, for him to get some clothes, an Indonesian trader needs to take it from the Malacca Islands. I'm just going to call them the Spice Islands, otherwise it's too confusing. And he has to sort of go all the way here to the Straits of Malacca if he wants to export it east, right? And there they travel through many hands, and as we said, there's an Islamic sultanate at Malacca. Now, as far as I'm aware, the Indonesian vessels themselves didn't take these spices further. Maybe some of them did, I might be wrong. It was mainly, the market was dominated by Arab ships, okay? So we had ships from, very relevant today, places like Hormuz, Persian Gulf, and Aden, okay? These big Islamic shipping cities. They would send their fleets to Malacca to collect all the spices that had come from these tiny little spice islands. And they knew there was a very profitable business. They would also get, interestingly, cinnamon from Ceylon. That was the only place, which is modern day Sri Lanka. That was the only place where cinnamon came from. And by this time, I'm not completely across the scenario in India. All I know is that in the late 1400s, the Mughals are already established. I think they come in the 1450s. And so there's the Mughal Empire in the north of India, and the south of India is a bit of a mosaic. There are sultanates, I think, Islamic sultanates, and there are Hindu kingdoms. I'm not sure if any of them had a big shipping industry that would take these spices from the Spice Islands east. I think the only reason the Arab traders they were just in prime position, right? So if you're located in Hormuz or in Aden, and your ships manage to get cargo that the Europeans want, you have prime location here, the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. And then, I mean, it's a bit easier from the Red Sea side. You need to do a short trek, not that short, but short on the map here, through horrible, inhospitable desert to get to, a port like Alexandria in Egypt on the Mediterranean coast. And I think some of the ships went through, Strait of Hormuz, very relevant today, and then went up through the lands of the Tigris and the Euphrates down to, Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey, and all the Mediterranean ports, Eastern Mediterranean ports here, places like Beirut, Tyre, what's the one in Israel called Haifa, Jaffa, places like this. Of course, Israel was far from a country back then still. Okay, that sort of set the scene of the world's spice trade. Another important factor that I need to mention is the Venetians, okay? So the Venetians are actually very important for Magellan's circumnavigation of the globe. The Venetians have made a deal with what are called the Mameluke sultans of Egypt. The Mamelukes are very interesting people. It's this Islamic ruling dynasty, warrior dynasty, that has its roots in escaped slaves or slaves that rebelled against their overlords. And a very famous Mameluke, which I think it just means slave soldier, a very famous Mameluke leader, was, as far as I'm aware, the only military leader ever to defeat the Mongols in battle. This was a bit earlier in I think the 1300s or the late 1200s. Anyway, these guys have some pedigree, and they're now mainly making money from trade. Alexandria is their biggest port, and they've made a deal with the Venetians here. The Venetians, they're always, they're where the money is, the Venetians. You can see why Shakespeare wrote plays like The Merchant of Venice, that they were still massive in the 1590s, early 1600s. And here they're even more powerful, okay? So late 1400s, early 1500s, the Venetians have a complete monopoly on the spice trade. This sounds more and more like Dune, doesn't it? Spice trade. And they have made deals with the Mamelukes, I said, in Egypt, and also they've made deals with any of these other ports here, on places like Beirut. So they essentially have a monopoly on the spice market, right? They've somehow swindled things so that all of these cities will only trade with a Venetian ship, not anyone else. And then not any other European ship. And then the Venetians have this very efficient way of bringing their ships down from Venice, having a very heavily fortified ships guarding the main spice ship, and then it goes all the way back to Venice to the Rialto market, which you can still go to in central Venezia. I've never been to Venice. I would love to go there knowing all this now. And apparently in Venice still, a lot of the local dishes have those three spices as their core elements: cloves, mace, and nutmeg. So it's crazy how things work still. Now, this Venetian monopoly was a big problem, especially for the Iberians here, the Castilians, the Aragonese. Remember, the Castilians are Queen Isabella. She will be Castilian. she will marry King Ferdinand, another Ferdinand. We've got Ferdinand Magellan and King Ferdinand of Aragon, which is more on the, what's that? I always get my east and west mixed up. Western side of Spain. And they, the Aragonese are more of a naval power. They have places, for example, like Sardinia and Naples are under Aragonese control at the moment. Venice is obviously on the other side, the eastern side of the Italian peninsula. So they're not really worried about the Aragonese. But the Aragonese, the Castilians, and the Portuguese especially are very worried about the Venetians because they keep ramping up prices for spice. And at one point, King Manuel I, I think was his name, in Portugal, he's sitting in Lisbon and he thinks, you know, we've had quite a good record of sailing, and we're pretty good at building ships, and we're really good at navigating. They've had a bit of a history of being really good navigators at sea. We're sick and tired of this Venetian monopoly. We think the easiest way to get spices ourselves is not to fight the Venetians and sort of have a really messy time here in the Mediterranean. We're just going to go take our ships and sail all the way around the African continent, okay? And Vasco da Gama does this in 1488. As someone from Cape Town, as someone from the Cabo de Buena Esperanza, I think is how you say it in Portuguese, the Cape of Good Hope, which is literally why Cape Town exists as a European settlement. Obviously, there were people for hundreds of thousands of years before that, as all humans are from Africa. But Vasco da Gama sails around the Cape of Good Hope in 1488. And actually, not Vasco da Gama, importantly not. It was Bartolomé Diaz, 1488. Anyway, Vasco da Gama is the first Portuguese guy to found or settle in Goa, I think. So the Portuguese now have a colony in India. And they then move quickly. Their goal the whole time is the spice trade, right? Because that's where all the money is. They know that if they can get from India and take Malacca here, they will have complete dominion over all the spices that get squeezed through this narrow strait of Malacca, okay? And that's what Manuel I's plan is. And there's this guy, he's viceroy, I think, of Goa, called Dom Afonso Albuquerque. I'm not actually sure if the Albuquerque in New Mexico that's, you know, so famous from Breaking Bad is named after him. I wouldn't be surprised. Albuquerque is viceroy of, he's like the governor, essentially. Viceroy is just another word for governor, of the Goan colony there in India. And he sails in 1511 to go and take Malacca with an army, with, you know, a fleet of ships. And remember, we have Islamic merchants and an Islamic sultan who is native to Malaysia, ruling the area. And we have these, you know, Islamic ships from the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Aden who dominate this trade. But Albuquerque doesn't care about any of that. He knows that as long as it takes the actual choke point here of Malacca, it doesn't matter about any of these ships. If he can control this point and, you know, not lose it to anyone else, anyone who wants to trade there has to, like, you know, essentially pay the toll. He wants to be the Link T toll booth, to put it in Australian terms, of this super highway for spices. Okay, and importantly, one guy that comes with him on this mission in 1511 to take Malacca is Fernão Magalhães, Ferdinand Magellan. I have no idea how we get Magellan from Magalhães. Yeah, one of the vagaries of transliteration, I guess. And Fernão, I'm just going to call him by his Portuguese. I like the Portuguese name. Fernão, who's with Afonso here, his overlord, ends up surviving the fighting. The Portuguese end up being victorious. I'm not going to go into the details. I'm sure there are many other places where that's covered. But crucially, Magalhães sails back, Magellan sails back afterwards, back to his home in Lisbon, all the way around Africa, back up. I'm not actually sure exactly how he got back. I'm almost certain it would have been that way, and not overland through either the Persian or the Gulf or the Red Sea. That was the Portuguese shipping route that they carved out for themselves. But who does he take with him back home to Lisbon? He has an enslaved man who is named Enrique. Now, Enrique's original name has been lost, unfortunately. All that's really known about him is that Magellan, bought him in Malacca after the Portuguese took over and took him back as a slave. And the origins of Enrique are also a little hazy. Some people say he was actually from the Philippines, and others say he was from, the Malaysian peninsula where Malacca is, close to modern-day Singapore. Let's keep that in mind, either from the Philippines or somewhere in Indonesia, or either from Malacca, okay? But this man now, the same as Magalhães, has sailed from Malacca to Lisbon, okay? So if we're thinking about circumnavigators of the globe, they've made a big dent already, both of those guys. Now, Magellan tries to convince his king. He's Portuguese, remember? Magellan is Portuguese, even though he ends up sailing for the Spanish. At this point, he tries to go to Manuel I, the king. He says, look, I was part of your expeditionary force to take Malacca. I survived. I covered myself in glory, whatever. Please sponsor me. I want to go around the other side of the world, okay? He wants to find a route, a different route that he thinks will be shorter for some reason. People vastly underestimated the size of the Pacific. And he wants to find a different route to the Spice Islands. I'm not actually sure completely why. Maybe the African journey was just terrible. But yeah, he was obsessed with, finding the pioneer to find a new one. He wanted to be the guy. And Manuel just tells him, no, get stuffed. And what does a Machiavellian character like Magellan do? He goes over to the Spanish, okay? The Portuguese and the Spanish, this is like 1510, near the 1520s. They are arch rivals at the moment. We've broken away from Spain by this time being a bunch of kingdoms that are fighting. It's quite unified. And if we remember King Charles I, called Don Carlos, that's what the Spanish called him, he is that Habsburg guy, right? He's got a massive empire. So if Magellan, lowly old Magellan from small little Portugal, who is gaining, Portugal is gaining wealth by the second, ever since they took Malacca in 1511. But Portugal doesn't want to sponsor Magellan. So Magellan goes over to the Spanish, he defects essentially, goes to Seville. If we remember, Seville is where all the Spanish silver will come from, or will come to, because that's where the treasury is from the Americas. Of course, they're already in the Americas by this point, the Spanish. Magellan, I think Columbus might be dead by this point. Magellan sits in front of a representative of King Charles, the big boy in Europe, Don Carlos, I think some archbishop or something, because Charles was a very Christian guy. And the representative says, we will give you money, you can go. We'll make you sort of the captain of or we'll make you in charge of the mission. And finally, Magellan has his chance. So he goes down here. Of course, the Portuguese have a colony in Brazil. I actually don't think he visits that. He sort of sticks to the African coast, and eventually he will be the one. It's hard to see on here, but all the way down the bottom, near what's that area called? It's called Tierra del Fuego, that's it, yeah, awesome name. Tierra del Fuego is the land of fire, the southern tip of South America. Very stormy weather, horrific conditions for ships. But when Magellan eventually, or Magalhães, discovers the Magellan Passage around, so he wants to be the next Bartolomeu Diaz, right? So his countryman has already gone around the Cabo de Buena Esperanza, Cape of Good Hope. He wants to be the first one to round the bottom of South America, and he does so successfully at great cost. I was saying how it's Tierra del Fuego. So apparently when these ships were going through this, these very stormy waters, it's freezing, it's down at the bottom of the world, they see on land, they see these fires everywhere. And they have no idea what they are. I don't actually know if they ever make contact with the people who light these fires, but it's a very spooky thing, especially at night. They just see all these spot fires on the land. And this is thought to have been local people who were very interesting. They apparently didn't wear super thick clothing, but were still managed to live in very cold conditions. And apparently the way they did this was just to have fire. They had ways of preserving fire, keeping fires going for a very long time, and transporting them around with them. Apparently they would even canoe. It was a big fishing area down there, lots of islands, freezing cold islands, but they would canoe around with fires in the boat. Like they were experts at handling fire. Anyway, Magellan makes it through at great cost, I said, because I'm not sure if one of his ships gets wrecked. I actually think all of them make it through, maybe, but there are a lot of mutinies. Okay, so his crew are not happy with the way the mission's going. Some of them do not like Magellan very much, and he has to chop some heads off of people. I don't know if he marches people down the gangplank and shoves them off like they do in Pirates of the Caribbean. I think it's more brutal. I think they just get decapitated. And then he makes his way. Remember, who is Magellan's companion? We have this enslaved man, this mysterious man called Enrique. He has come with the whole time, probably not by choice. I think Magellan's forced him to come on his ship with him, but he's still there. Magellan then he gets around the tip of South America. He makes the epic voyage across the Pacific. I don't know how, they must have been exceptional navigators or something. Maybe they just got really lucky, but they got all the way over somehow. I think they limped over. I don't think they were in great condition, these guys, but they got there. They get to the Philippines, and crazy stuff happens at the Philippines. I will just paraphrase here. If you want to see this stuff in good detail, there's a really nice movie that I actually watched yesterday. It's called Magellan, and it's by a Filipino director. It came out in 2025, I think, and it depicts this story really nicely. It's really historically accurate. It's not, it's a bit slow, I think, for some people, because there's not, big bravado, and it's not like a Marvel movie. It's like a very accurate historical movie, maybe more for nerds like me, but I learned a lot. So in the Philippines, he hits land. And I think he sort of knows where he is. He knows he's close, remember, he's close to these spice islands. And he wants to have direct access to these spice islands, and he knows he's close. And he knows he can get from the Philippines, there should be a way to get back to Malacca, and from there, the ships know the way back to Portugal. But tragedy strikes, and Magellan is actually killed by local people, by indigenous people. I'm sure they had fairly good reasons for doing so. He's actually also decapitated and paraded around by local people, as they, again, I think very understandably celebrate his death. I think he did some very not very nice things, and his men were, sort of just super annoying, super violent people who thought that anyone who wasn't a Catholic was essentially, lesser, especially if they look different to you. But Magellan dies in the Philippines. And the interesting thing is Enrique, who, I wish we knew what his real name was. I don't want to make up a name, but he shouldn't be known as Enrique. The enslaved man from the Philippines, nameless. Maybe he doesn't even remember his own birth name. I don't know how old he was when he got sold into slavery. He is never seen again. So he escapes in the fighting that happens. So Magellan's ships land. I think they do some weird stuff where they try and convert some of the local people to Christianity. It doesn't end up going very well, and there's a big massacre. A lot of people die, and some of the ships get away. And the names that we're taught, I'm sure they get taught in the Iberian Peninsula, but not really that much in Australia. There's a guy, Juan Sebastian Elcano, was the captain who took over the remaining 2 or 3 ships. There was actually only one ship, I think, that made it all the way around. The Victoria was the name of the ship. Juan Sebastian Elcano, who was a guy from the Basque country in Spain. He makes it all the way back to the Iberian Peninsula. And remember this voyage, even though it's captained by a Portuguese, Magellan is Portuguese, it's sanctioned by the Spanish crown. So this is essentially, Magellan was really clever, right? Because the Portuguese rejected his plan. They're like, oh, we already have a route to the Spice Islands. We've captured Malacca, like get screwed. He knows that he'll be able to entice the rivals, Don Carlos's men, the Spanish, because they don't have a way to get the Spice Island. They either have to buy it from the Portuguese or they have to buy it from the Venetians. And Magellan has just discovered a different way to get there. It's a lot longer, and I think, as I say in a different video, they end up abandoning this southern route because it's so treacherous, and the Spanish will eventually sail across, cross the Mexican continent here, and then go straight from there. The famous Manila galleons, Spanish galleons, that take the silver to Manila and the Philippines, trade it for Chinese goods, and come back. They never actually use the route that Magellan found, but they do use the Philippines that Magellan found, or found out for Spanish people that they actually existed. You know, these people, the Chinese, and lots of other people knew about the Philippines beforehand, and knew. I don't know if people had crossed the Pacific before. Definitely there were Pacific Islander navigators who had crossed maybe the entire Pacific before that, but yeah, Magellan came from a really far away place for someone to be able to do that successfully. But, so he had gone to Malacca and he died here. He got pretty close to circumnavigating the globe. I think there is a very high chance, and me and sort of many others like to posit this theory, that Enrique, the enslaved man who escaped here, if he was from the Philippines, he would have already completed the loop, right? He would have been born here, got traded, become enslaved, got traded to Malacca, and then gone with Magellan back to Portugal. But if he was from Malacca, there is also a high chance that he made his way, he was still, in the prime of his life, that he could have made his way back to Malacca. He could understand local Filipinos. So they were the same language group as in Malacca or wherever he was born. He was a crucial interpreter for Magellan and his men in the Philippines. So he must have had a very strange moment of feeling like he had come back to a place that was his former home. I don't know if he had, what he must have felt. It must have been very hard to describe, maybe even for him. He's gone all the way around the world, been subjected to all different manners of horrors, and here he finds people who he can understand and who seem perhaps more like him than any of his enslavers or Spanish or Portuguese, these Iberian bearded men. Very interesting. I like to think that Enrique, I wish we knew his real name, from Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, an enslaved man, was the first human being to circumnavigate the globe. Thank you for listening, and stay curious.